Good morning. Thank you so much for joining us for our March Clear Up the Chaos. I am thrilled to have you here. We have Amanda Flynn with us today from Ironwood Business Consulting that's going to be speaking on some new topics. This month we have strayed from the COVID conversations, which I'm kind of looking forward to some new content. I do want to remind you, as a client of NCW and San Bernardino, you do have access to Ironwood. So if you do continue to have COVID questions arise, please feel free to reach out to myself and I can get you the paperwork that's involved in getting set up with that. Or if you have completed that, feel free to reach out to them directly for any questions that you have. But I'm going to hand things off this morning to Amanda, and she's going to begin speaking to us on managing challenging behaviors and all that encompasses that within the workforce. So good morning, Amanda, and welcome.
Good morning, Elizabeth. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. As Elizabeth mentioned, I hope you guys are as refreshed as I am that we get to talk about something other than COVID this month. So hopefully this will be a nice tradition moving forward, knock on wood. So today we have two main categories that then we broke off into smaller categories. And we're going to start with managing challenging behaviors. And then from there, we're going to work our way into workplace conflict. But to start off, I don't know if it's just, the new year has started off. And once we got all of that housekeeping items out of the way, I feel like a lot of the leaders and calls that I've been taking lately have been a bit more with workplace conflicts or that challenging behavior, whether it be in one of your direct reports or your employees or someone on your team. So this has come up a lot lately. So I feel like this is a great topic to get us started. And then it really works hand in hand with workplace conflict, because unfortunately, a lot of times these two things come at the same time. It's a challenging behavior and a conflict. So we're going to work through a couple of different main components of that. In the first part of managing challenging behaviors we're going to look at is what I like to call the rules of engagement. So these are just 4, let's call them reminders. I'm going to be real honest, they sound a bit cliche, but it's those things that your grandparents probably told you or your parents told you that are just some good daily reminders that even though you're the leader or you're the HR contact or you're the head of your department and your team, that it's a good thing to keep in mind, because we get so bogged down in the day-to-day and everything that's going on that sometimes some of the most obvious answers seem difficult, or you second guess yourself. That's actually probably what I feel like I get the most calls about is you guys know the answer, like 95% of it. You just need a little bit of pat on the back or a little bit of confidence to get there. So hopefully this will get you thinking you're already on the right track. And so the first one of the rules of engagement, I would say, so you are dealing at this point with that employee that is presenting some sort of challenging behavior. So whether it be that they are always late, whether they are the one that is negative about anything and everything, you pick up a challenging behavior and fill in the blank here. So the first one I would say is it's not just what you say to the employee, it's how you say it. So again, very similar to probably things you have heard all of your life, but really focusing on the tone and the attitude that you take in approaching individuals. What I find a lot of the times is, myself included, the first time somebody presents a challenging behavior, a lot of times you might stay in your own head about it a little bit too much. Like, am I interpreting this wrong? Did I possibly hear that correctly? And we stay in our head too long instead of just talking to the individual about the behavior or asking them, this is what I heard. Is that what you intended to say, and talking through it? So thinking about whether it be that first time or if you let it slip and you let it wait and now it's festered a little bit longer and you're now deciding to sit down with that individual and have the conversation, how important how you approach that meeting is. A lot of times if you are nervous about the situation, that employee is going to feel that. Even if you are normally the most calm, cool, collected individual, if you've got some nerves going in, chances are they're going to have even more nerves. So I like to advise people to do whatever would make them feel most comfortable in that situation. So that might be writing bullet points for yourself. That might be practicing, which again, I know this is something you do every day, so it could sound a little silly, but however you choose to tackle the conversation that you'll feel confident and actually tackle it is the route to go. So that being said, coming into the meeting with an open mind, being willing to listen. Yes, you're conveying the information, especially in the point of supervisors or leadership where you're coming from, pointing out the behavior and asking for it to change or for us to approach it differently. As the superior, that can really easily turn into a shaming situation or turn very negative very quickly, even if that's not our intention. So just making sure we are choosing our words carefully, that we remain calm, cool, and collective. Sometimes I have to remind people that it's okay in a moment. If you've got, let's say, an employee who has lost their temper and that puts you on edge, you can take 5. You don't have to address it then. Don't wait too long, but you don't have to address it right in that moment, so that when you do have that sit down or that one-on-one, or you pull them aside to talk to them about it, that your tone is coming from a place of sincerity. You want this employee to succeed. We want to work past this roadblock, and really coming into it with that mindset and approaching it with that sort of language, versus just pointing out, you're doing X, Y, Z, and that is causing ABC, all these problems. So if you are more likely to approach the situation with respect and compassion, they're more likely to respond similarly. So making sure not just what we say, but how we say it. A little bit further of a step from that is what you want for yourself, give to others. So again, very close to a common cliche, treat others as you would want to be treated. But thinking about the individuals that you work with every day, even though we may have different roles within the company and very different day-to-day tasks, most of us want the same things when we come to work. We want to be respected. We want to be communicated with. We want to receive feedback when it's necessary in a respectful manner. And we want to do a good job. And so making sure that we are keeping that also in mind, and when we're working with our employees and talking about a specific behavior. Again, sometimes we get a bit in our own head as supervisors and leaders, and we think, okay, maybe if we approach this difficult conversation very carefully and we tiptoe around what we're asking for or what we're talking about it, because they'll just figure out what I'm saying. I don't want to say specifically your bad attitude is dragging our team down. But again, remember that you have to be very open with individuals, be respectful with them, but the same sort of courtesy and the same sort of communication that you would want from your supervisor and your team, they are probably going to expect and need something very similar, even if they don't know it yet. And right now, one of the things I'm hearing a little bit more as well is individuals being afraid to approach these conversations because of the labor shortage, which I understand 1000%. I know that this is a tougher market for employers, than it's been as long as we can probably remember. But that doesn't mean that we can allow behavior that is unacceptable to continue. Again, as long as we are being honest and open, we're approaching it with respect and communicating, we're just having a conversation with another individual and asking for a change in their behavior. So I don't want you to be afraid of losing employees because you're pointing out an issue. You want to just come at it from a place that is wanting that employee to succeed, wanting our team to succeed, wanting us all to do better. So again, thinking about what you would want your boss to say to you or your team, how you would want that feedback, and then applying that similarly to your team and what you know about them. Third big key of rules of engagement here is honesty is the best policy. So that I feel like needs to come with the asterisk of, to the degree that you can be honest with individuals. Obviously, at different levels within the organization, there are just different things that we can share with our employees and what we can't. But again, by tiptoeing around an issue and not necessarily getting to the crux of it, I think sometimes we think that we're being kind, but we tend to sidestep so far that we don't actually address the issue that's going on. You see this a lot of times when, let's say there's a problem behavior on the team and you've noticed it, it's ongoing, it's not just a one-off. So instead of talking to that individual one-on-one, we put it on a staff meeting agenda, or we put it on our team meeting agenda. And even though if you've got 6 employees on your team, 5 of them are behaving wonderfully, they're with the team, okay, maybe wonderfully is too far, but they are doing their jobs, they're actively participating, it's not an issue. Let's say it's the negative attitude towards work. Those individuals, when you bring that up in a group setting, now you've turned the table and possibly made them think that they're doing something wrong. Whereas that individual that has the bad attitude, not all the time, but most likely is either not hearing you, not applying it. If they were picking up on those social cues and context clues, they would have already changed their behavior. So being honest and approachable and having those conversations one-on-one versus mass applying it to everyone. Again, that's always going to be relative, because if it applies to the group, you're going to talk to the whole group about it. And then the last thing to remember when you start to engage with the employee is just bearing in mind the power of perception, that it's not necessarily right or wrong, it just is. And with that, I mean, when you are sharing your perception of a situation, so you're being honest, you're being open, you're letting that employee know this is the feedback you're receiving, and conveying that, there's no wrong about it. It's how you deliver the information. Now, that may not be their intention. They may come back and say, you know, I perceive the situation entirely differently. And I think it's important to remember that it's okay to have different views about what has happened in the past or what needs to happen moving forward. Now, again, you're going to set the expectation, hopefully, for your team. But you do want to be open to the idea that we may just be interpreting this differently. Let's accept that and let's work on our plan to what we're going to do next. How are we going to move forward in this situation? A lot of times this comes up, I feel like things like performance reviews, you know, year after year, individuals are sometimes not given negative feedback on their performance reviews. You know, they might do a self-assessment and score themselves rather high. And either because the check-ins are not regular or because you don't want to put it in writing because you don't want it on their permanent record, you know, then that really important feedback often doesn't make the review. So again, a great strategy for something like that is this angle of perception. Now, conveying to the individual, this is what I'm seeing, and explaining, you know, together we can move forward and we can move past this, but this is how it's being conveyed to the team. So from that, again, we're still thinking about our managing difficult situations. I'm going to switch gears on you a little bit here and think about some of those uncomfortable workplace dilemmas. So by this, those are the conversations that would make most people uncomfortable. A lot of times this might be tied to whether it be a physical attribute or something personal going on with the employees. I do a lot of trainings and one-on-ones with supervisors, and this one comes up all the time. And I normally put it at the beginning because we do some role playing, and you're probably rolling your eyes at that too. But it's a good way to practice because we never get to practice otherwise. And the example that I use all the time to get people talking, to get people thinking, and to get their head around what is an uncomfortable workplace dilemma is, let's pretend like you're managing the team and it has come up through several employees complaining and us now causing a business interruption, that one of the individuals is having a problem with body odor. And again, you're probably chuckling to yourself if I've delivered that correctly, because it's not something people want to talk about. But you as the manager or the leader or the position in HR, a lot of times are going to be the one that either someone else is going to come to for advice on the situation or is going to ask you to facilitate the conversations. So let's for a second take out any sort of health concern, any sort of specialized situation. This is just an issue, and you are now tasked with talking to that employee about this, because it's not just a complaint, it's actually causing business interruption. We've gotten to the point where we have to have that conversation. We're still going to pull some of those rules of engagement ideas through about honesty and openness. We're going to make sure, of course, in this situation, to be in a private environment, to be one-on-one, to be respectful, and to make sure that you can even start the meeting by recognizing that this is going to be uncomfortable. This also makes me uncomfortable. Again, as long as you're saying it in a professional, respectful manner, it's okay to be vulnerable in that way. Not in a judging, mocking way, but I've asked you in here today to talk about a situation, and I don't want you to feel disrespected, but I also don't want to allow to continue it to affect the workplace or to have anyone talking about you. I just want to have the conversation with you. And honestly, I'm a little nervous because I don't want to make you uncomfortable. It's okay to share that vulnerabilities with those individuals. A lot of times that's going to make them more at ease. And even though you're about to launch into something difficult, maybe it's something, we also use the example a lot about dress codes. Maybe somebody isn't realizing that their clothes aren't fitting anymore in the way that they need to at the office. Something, again, think the most uncomfortable situations and conversations that you've ever had to have with your employees. And again, most of the time, I'm putting that in the way that others perceive us, either the way that that employee looks or acts, because it's very personal and we want to be respectful, knowing that we could upset that employee. But again, approaching the situation very carefully. This is another one where I wouldn't just wing the conversation. I would either go in with however you process. If you process with bullet points, if you need to write out the whole conversation, if you need to practice and talk to someone about it, this one for sure I would have a plan for going into. If you are talking to an individual about, let's say, something like dress code, or even if it was a body odor issue and maybe we're concerned maybe that it's tied to a different religious or cultural belief, I would say in that situation, it is a good idea to have a trusted third person in there. If you are afraid, let's say you're a man and you're talking to a woman about the situation, that they're going to be even more comfortable about having this conversation with someone that, is different than them. So if you would deem that having a third party, maybe it's another manager, maybe it's another member of your team, obviously not one of their direct coworkers that's coming in and piling on, but somebody managerial or HR or in a respected level of leadership, so that they know that the conversation is still private, but we're trying to make them more comfortable. And you would explain that too. I've asked Sally to come in here with me just to make sure that you're comfortable and that we stay on the same page and we understand what we're talking about. So invite a witness if it's warranted. And again, focus on the specific issue, so whether that be an odor issue. And again, we're only bringing it up because it's now caused a work interruption, and help me help you solve this problem. Or if it's a dress code type violation, whether that be giving them some ideas for some different ways to adjust. So if you've got uniforms, maybe they need an additional uniform in a different size. Or again, kind of just coming from an angle of support, encouragement. I do want to be honest and communicate with you, but I do also need to come up with a resolution for this issue together. Again, tie in that tone, that openness, that honesty that we talked about with rules of engagement, and be as transparent as possible while being respectful of that individual and how they might be feeling in this situation. And then I jumped ahead of myself here a little bit before, but we've got a few different leadership style challenges that I would deem come up the most often when facing either it be those uncomfortable workplace scenarios or those problem employees that I see or hear about the most. And number one, this is the one I jumped ahead on, but as far as leadership style challenges go, the number one thing I see in here is just the unwillingness to confront the problem head on. And I know that that sounds either very simple or that I'm making it much more simple than issues in the workplace can be. But oftentimes, because we naturally don't like conflict, we tend to either downplay the situation. We say, oh, we'll talk to them about it the next time it comes up. And again, it just gets pushed and it gets pushed and it gets pushed until the employee may now deem that the behavior is acceptable. Or it's gotten to a point that when you do have the conversation, now it's been going on for months and you really are at the disadvantage of, okay, I know I've not said something about your tardiness, the last 15 times you've been late, and then it's been 3 months now. But now I'm finally at my breaking point. To the degree that it's possible for you, confronting those problems before they really get out of hand. And it's a balance. I'm not going to say that it's easy because sometimes somebody's late, if we're going to stay with that tardiness behavior. And if they're never late, and they're a star individual and you know that people are late, you're a realistic human being. So you're like, oh, this time it's fine. I'll just let it slide. This is an off day for that person. You've got to remember that you need to treat your employees and those disciplinary expectations the same. So if you were going to have a informal one-on-one brief, hey, I noticed you've been late a lot lately, what's going on? I need us to get back on track. Have that same conversation, even with your rock stars. It can, again, be honest about, I appreciate so much with how you contribute to the team, but I have noticed you've been getting in later and later, and I do want to talk about this so that the problem doesn't get out of hand before it's really started to not only affect you and your frustration, but it's affected the team and their production levels. The next big one I would say that's challenging for leaders that we hear about a lot is handling group complaints wisely. And again, I am not going to pretend like this is an easy one to navigate, especially depending on what your office or group setup is. Sometimes things can just be very cliquish, and it can be hard to understand or determine, is this that big of a problem? Let's say you're not down there with your employees all day, every day. Let's say you've got a few different teams, but you're getting an ongoing report that will stay with somebody being late, that someone's late. And you are trying to figure out, okay, is this really that big of a problem? Do they just not like this individual? Are we ganging up on this individual for some reason? Maybe because they have been the rock star and received a lot of positive attention. but really trying to manage the why behind why you might be receiving group complaints, making sure that we are not sharing too much information between individuals, making sure that it's not becoming a gossipy or a he said versus she said, or that you're not giving different answers or disclosing too much to one group versus another. And even though I told you earlier when we were talking about approaching problems, sometimes at the approaching it at the team level is not the best if it's a one-on-one problem. This might be one that is a good situation to approach together. That's really going to depend on the issue and your team dynamics. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that in the second half, I think. But really trying to understand the why behind group complaints, making sure we're not giving away too much information, but being observant. And providing feedback and then acting when necessary. And then the last big leadership style challenge that we see is just an overall lack of leadership. And I don't mean this in an especially harsh or negative way, because I think a lot of times our intentions are in the right place. And it's just a matter of we have 80 things to do and there's really only time for 20. And that feedback, that leadership, that mentoring relationship with your team oftentimes just gets pushed to the bottom of the list because you're trying to meet a client or a customer's needs or a sale, something like that, where it always feels like, those internal personal relationships are the things that can just be fixed later. That really kind of combines that unwillingness to confront the problem or the unwillingness to have those tough conversations with people. Remembering that even if you have a rock star team, maybe you don't have that challenging behavior on your team, and they still need feedback, they still need encouragement, they could still be challenged to get to the next level. And even though we are all very busy, trying to find a way to manage that in some way, shape, or form. And that may look different for all of us. Those might mean phone calls versus one-on-ones. That might be setting things up on your calendar, either formally or informally, to be able to have those interactions and that feedback. But really embracing your role as not just a manager or a supervisor, but as a leader, whether or not you have direct reports or not. You can still be a leader for the team and someone that the organization looks to as being respectful and open and approaching all of these challenges head on. So thinking through that, again, we're going to shift gears a little bit into our second half and our second topic of workplace conflict. But I'm going to tie it together a little bit because we've just learned a lot of different strategies that could probably apply to these situations. So the first area that we're going to discuss as far as that workplace conflict is really working through if you were needing to do some sort of mediation. And again, this might be within your team members, this might be with individuals in an organization if you assist with that across the board. But mediation can be a really helpful and a really effective way to get employees or team members talking and working through a situation, especially when it's some of those interpersonal dilemmas. Obviously, if it is something that we are falling into, harassment that we're going to talk about in a minute, something illegal, something, extreme and severe, that's probably not the time for mediation. This is more going to be those dynamics, those things that can reasonably and should be talked out among individuals. So those workplace clashes, that's going to be when mediation is most helpful. It should also be voluntary. Now, I know a lot of times at work, voluntary is a loose word. Especially if you have started this situation and you've let them know that there's a problem and given your suggestion being mediation to move forward. They may not feel like it's voluntary, but hopefully in your delivery and explanation of the situation and your goals for mediation, they'll understand that that is truly a place that you're coming from, that you want both individuals. Let's say they're having a conflict. Let's just say it's two individuals. That you want both of them to be successful at work. You want our team to be successful. So, to do this, I'd like to have us all sit down together and have this conversation. When you're doing some sort of mediation, you want to make sure that you choose an appropriate facilitator. Sometimes as the direct supervisor, or if you have some sort of mentoring or personal, even close work relationships with the individuals, even if you're the supervisor, you may not necessarily be the best facilitator if you're too close to that situation. And most of us are able to judge that for ourselves. And you're probably been doing this long enough and been working with your team and different team dynamics long enough that you can be a middleman, you can be neutral, you can, not choose sides unnecessarily when talking to individuals, two different individuals on your team. But I think it's important to ask and make sure that you are the right person and make sure you're not too close to it. If this has been a situation between the individuals that has been going on or festering for quite a long time, or maybe it gets a little better because we have a conversation and then it goes back downhill from there. One of those things that's been happening, it's not a brand new conflict. They may not be at a place that they are ready to sit down together with you or another facilitator and have a conversation or be able to talk through it. And I think if you are talking to the two individuals, of course, one-on-one and proposing this idea of mediation, you want to be clear again and tie it back to the voluntary part that, I think that the way to move forward is for us to talk through this together. Be willing and open that employee may not be there yet. We don't want to let the problem continue to go on and on, but we want to touch base and encourage this method to move forward. So working with that individual, maybe they're just not ready today. If there was a skirmish or a disagreement or a flare-up today, maybe today's not the best day to jump into mediation. Maybe we give it a day and we put it on the calendar and plan to do it in a day or two. We don't want to wait so long that it's not relevant anymore, but we also want everyone to come with calm heads and open to the conversation. So making sure that timing is right. Again, you might need to have one-on-one conversations prior to that team meeting if there's anything that needs to be discussed or is sensitive, or if they don't know that they could bring up together. So understand that this might be a process. It might be conversation with employee A, then conversation with employee B, and then us coming together and working to mediate through a situation. When you are with the individual, so we've gotten to that group meeting, we want to prompt both of them to be as specific and as open as possible while they can be respectful, but to really talk to the other individual. Again, it might be teaching them that phrasing of, this is my perception of the situation, or this is how I interpreted it. But getting them to, not beat around that bush, not, oh, you've upset me, or, oh, I feel like you're always attacking me, but being really specific about, the other day, this was said when you came into the office and I felt like it was directed at me, but getting them to think very specifically. And that might be something that you remind them of in that one-on-one beforehand, so that they are not on the spot, because they're probably going to be nervous in the situation, that they might have specific examples that they need to think about before coming in, so that they are ready to talk about it calmly. Again, the goal being with that third party there, that this is a less emotionally charged conversation. It's very easy because we spend so much time together at the workplace. And a lot of us really care about our jobs and our work and doing well, that it can become emotional. So again, bringing them back to, the point of mediation is for us to discuss and move forward, which might mean you might need to take breaks during the process. It might need to be that you get to a point and it's not working. Maybe the individuals weren't ready and you have to regroup and come up with a plan for how you're going to move forward. But being very clear about the process, being very clear about the expectations, what the rules are going to be for the conversation, which again, don't have to be difficult, just that we're talking to each other respectfully. You can give specific examples as far as, keeping our voice and tone at an appropriate level, from our word choice being respectful and open. And then also really reminding the individuals to listen to each other. That active listening is going to be a very important part of working through conflict. We need to try to truly hear what the other individual is saying versus just that listening to respond on the defensive, trying to jump in and justify everything. And again, that's our natural tendencies, or a lot of individuals' natural tendencies, to be defensive and go to that place. Again, that's why you're there as the neutral party, whether it be to jump in at that point, whether it be to rephrase or to reinforce, that's not what I heard the individual say. But again, encouraging that they listen to each other, that they are respectful, that they are getting those feelings and discussions out in the open. Again, if it does turn sideways, it gets too loud, gets too aggressive, don't be afraid to call it either, whether you deem you could try again at a later time or not. Most of the time, when you're two parties, you've got employee A and employee B, and you've talked to them about the one-on-one, the working together, about the mediation process. A lot of times, especially if you're the supervisor or leader on the team, they are misinterpreting your role as that neutral party, and they are looking to you for the solution. If you are going to facilitate, I would really encourage you to keep pushing that task and that conversation back to the employees, because you're not there necessarily to provide a solution. In fact, that should really be your last resort. We want to give them the tools as individuals so that they can talk through these issues and work something out. Let's say it's a lunch scheduling issue, or a who has to stay late when someone calls in sick. Insert your workplace drama here, whatever it might be. We don't want to set the expectation that although we want to be here and be supportive and mediate, that you are going to fix everything, because that's not the pattern that we want to get into either. And that is often unintentional, but we fall into that too, because we try to start from this place of mediation, and then we end up being the one tossing out solutions and fixing it. But to the degree possible, getting them to talk through it and determine how they're going to move forward versus you giving a specific solution. You might need to give ideas, you might need to give some encouragement or some thoughts, but again, as much as possible, getting them to process the situation and come up with ideas for how we can successfully move forward. So clarifying that role, allowing both individuals to say their side of the story, or speak their piece, give their information, giving both time to talk and then them time to interact. Again, just keeping us on a calm and collective, respectful schedule, let's say, keeping them on track so that we don't go too far down the rabbit hole of pointing out specifics. Yes, we want them to say specifically what bothered them or the behavior that caused the conversation, but we don't need to list the 28 times in particular that happened. So keeping them on track is a big part of that. Reminding them that this conversation's intent is to be constructive, that although it's natural to be defensive when people are pointing out something that you did that upset them, that feedback and solutions are really the goal here. So once they have had their opportunity to share what their experience has been and how it has affected them, a good idea to kind of walk you through finalizing this situation is circling back, especially if we need a break, and asking them to restate what the other has said. So the same way that when you're actively listening to employees, that you might rephrase what they just said and check for understanding. You have them, rephrase or restate what they heard. Because again, the first time someone says something, or in a nervous situation where it's difficult to choose our words, or even the listener might not be in the mind frame where they are hearing what the other individual is trying to say. So asking them to restate, you can summarize if you feel like that's going to be productive. Sometimes you just need to keep moving, but if you want to summarize what both were said, again, remind them if they came up with an agreement to move forward, that they have both willingly entered this agreement. They've discussed it, they've brainstormed, they've come up with a possible solution. We're going to rule out and guide them to a different direction if they really start bringing up ideas that are just not possible. Whether it be a time constraint, a financial constraint, or just even a space and interaction constraint, anything that's unreasonable and unworkable. You are going to want to be open about that and try to get them onto another track, or use that idea as a building block to move to the next situation. Again, as that third party, you'll be summarizing when we come to breaks in the situation, or after each individual has talked and restated. And then if necessary, if either they haven't fully worked through the issue, or if you in the mediation, and depending on the length of maybe the disagreement or the conflict, how long it's been going on, you might know going in that this might take more than one session. But not being afraid that that is necessarily a bad thing or setting yourself up for failure. It might be something as simple as a time constraint, because that would be another thing that I would suggest if you're going to mediate, is setting that schedule and a timeline, because otherwise it is very easy for things to just keep going and keep piling on, and to keep talking. To have a definite break, whether that be a hard stop, that you have something else planned, or just letting the individuals know, okay, we're meeting today at 2, we're going to be stopping at 2:30. So I'm hoping that, employee A, does and talks the first 10 minutes, employee B talks the second 10 minutes, and we talk all together the last 10 minutes, whatever your schedule might be. That might be too much individual talking, but letting them know that schedule on the front end, and letting them know that, it might be possible that we need to meet again in the future, or come back and analyze the situation. Is this working? This sounded like a great agreement when we were all here discussing it in our office, but is this really working? Hopefully it's not that involved, and you were able to, get them talking and move forward. But there are going to be either some situations that are sticky enough or personal enough, or what I see the most is just ongoing enough, that this has been something that's been festering on and off between individuals for a large length of time, and one mediation session isn't going to solve it all. But I would really then finalize with them on just making sure that we're all in agreement, making sure that we're ready to move forward, whether that be at the end of a 30-minute session, or if it took you two sessions, or if you had to take a break at some point because individuals were upset or heated. But getting them to both, state that they agree and are willing to move forward with this. And you, again, as the neutral third party, making sure that that is coming with sincerity. It's got to be a workable solution. I know that you can't always judge their intent as an outsider, but making sure that they at least seem willing to give this a try to move forward. And it may be even that this is not a standalone process. Rather than a second session, it might be something, depending on the situation, where you need a different type of reinforcement. So maybe it's a situation and one individual discloses something else happening and you need to make sure you have provided them with the EAP information respectfully on the side if they brought up something, or just making sure that they're aware of that. Or if there's another resource that we can point them to, or something else that came up in the conversation that we can assist with, making sure that we are able to help them with that. From that, I'm going to roll into disrespect versus harassment, which might have been the reason that you guys work together. So to look at this, I'd like to define both of them really for you, because a lot of times it can be tough to, again, know that line of when did somebody have a poor choice of words versus this being harassment. So just again, remembering we don't ask our employees or anybody to come in and give up their rights to be respected just because they are coming in to work. Being mindful that that line between disrespect and harassment can be very thin. To really rise to the level of harassment, you need to be at a place where we are at unlawful conduct, that what that person did either specifically targeted a characteristic of another or a group of people. So by that meaning race, religion, origin, sex, disability, marital, any of the above, that it wasn't just a general picking on individuals, that it seems to be a targeting of a unique characteristic. And in one of the most, I don't want to say prevalent examples, but I feel like at least the one that's most commercialized is sexual harassment that you see come up. And I feel like, again, commercially, you normally see these quid pro quo situations where I'm picturing a bad like 90s harassment video in my head. So if you've ever had to do a workplace training like that, where the boss is asking the individual, to go on a date or pressuring them in, and if they date them, then they can get a raise. So that's the very traditional quid pro quo. But then probably just as prevalent, but maybe talked about less, is when that employee is just really continually at a place where they are uncomfortable because of another individual's discriminatory behavior. So again, in really trying to understand that line, the key part of harassment is that it's both unwelcome, and both individuals know that it's unwelcome, and that it's pervasive. So a one-time situation is not necessarily harassment. And a lot of times when we get calls, that's the question that we have for individuals. Has this been ongoing? Has this happened to others? So it needs to be a pattern or multiple occasions that this is happening, not a one-off. And then really bearing in mind that harassment can come in any form. It could be men to women, it could be women to women, it could be women to men, or any variety that I didn't just include. It doesn't necessarily have to be the stereotypical way that we think of it. It may also not be at a specific individual. It might be more at a group. Particularly sticky is it could be somebody in a supervisor position that is actually exhibiting this behavior. It could be happening unintentionally, truly unintentionally. Somebody's not aware of it rising to the level of harassment. It could be verbal, it could be nonverbal, it could be physical, it could be written. One of the fastest growing forms of harassment that we actually see and hear about is more age-related harassment, just because the workforce has so multi-generational right now. But anybody can go to a manager or to an HR person or individual and report harassment. And a point I'd like to clarify, I think sometimes people expect that conversation to be, boss, I've been harassed. The individual doesn't have to specifically say, I have been harassed. I'm coming to you to report a harassment. Most of the time, that's not how it's going to happen. They're going to share a situation that came up or that was ongoing. And although they didn't officially ask to report it, because this, especially if it's at that level where it's ongoing, pervasive, and unwarranted and unprovoked, so we might be on that harassment line, you as the supervisor or contact point can't just determine that this was a private or confidential conversation. At that point, you have to act and start to think about investigation type questions and concerns. So thinking about that way, we started with harassment, but disrespectful is more going to be that lack of consideration for others. It might be that joking to the level of bullying. It could be the gossip that happens in the office. But again, it's not to that level where it's specifically at an individual or a group of people because of a defining characteristic. It's just someone being disrespectful in the workplace, and that would need to be addressed, whether it be individually or together. So from there, let's pretend like that individual is in there and they didn't say those magic, this is a formal complaint. The way that you can roll that into gathering evidence is by asking more questions. You know, not just those who, what, when, where, why, which are extremely important, but getting them to really point out the details. What happened next? Has this happened on multiple occasions? Who else witnessed it? Because if you do roll into an investigation, those other witnesses are going to come in and ask questions, be asked questions as well. So we want to make sure we know who has either witnessed this or is aware of the situation. But specifically asking, you know, who said this to you? How did it make you feel? You know, you're gathering information, but you're also trying to display some empathy and talk with the individual. You are going to, at that point, see, you know, are there other individuals that are being talked to or harassed in the same way? Again, you're in that gathering phase, and that might be other individuals that you need to pull into this conversation. And I like to really wrap up those sorts of discussions and that discovery process by circling back and ending with something like, is there anything else that you're concerned about you haven't told me? Or anything I didn't ask you? Really give them the opportunity to give any other information that you may not have specifically asked about when trying to begin that harassment or that general investigation. And then let them know what to expect next, that I'm going to be gathering information. If we have an investigation, you know, I'll be talking to you more, and here's how an investigation would go on. While you're doing that, you're of course taking notes, you're documenting, you're going to be talking to more individuals. If there are specifics that were pointed out that you need to fact check, you know, you start doing all of that behind the scenes and really having to dissect, again, is this a harassment or is this a disrespect? Does this need to roll into some sort of investigation about how an individual is treating others? So that's really an overlapping process. You know, it could be them just coming to you with concerns, and that can be a very natural way to gather evidence for those possible next steps. Again, just reminding them that, you know, if it rolls to an investigation, it'll be a neutral party. They will determine the best way to handle the issue, but that they take any sort of feedback or complaints or reports of abusive behavior very seriously. And that's why we're going to roll into an investigation. And then, of course, conclude any of these meetings, really any of the 6 different types we've talked about now, really by thanking that individual. It's not easy for them to come to you with questions, concerns, to trust that they could report harassment or disrespect to them. That takes a lot of bravery. And even if they are the one that always comes to you, thanking them for coming to you and following the proper channels, doing it confidentially and respectfully. So I know we covered a lot today, but a lot of them really overlap together in some of that initial phases of working through conflict. So I did try to wrap up with a few minutes left to see if we had any questions. So
yes, we will see if any questions come through. Amanda, that was wonderful and so thorough, and we just appreciate all the examples that you shared with us. I know I learned a lot, so thank you for all that great information. I do want to remind everyone, Clear Up the Chaos does take place the second Tuesday of every month. So mark your calendars for our next Clear Up the Chaos on Tuesday, April 12th. I'll be sending out reminders with the content that we will be covering. I did want to let everyone know, you're the first to know, our Clear Up the Chaos attendees, that we are having our Q1 seminar on Thursday, March 31st, and Amanda is going to be assisting us with that as well. The topic is how to craft useful and compliant job descriptions. So in my follow-up email that I send, I'll be sending that out with a link if you or anyone within your organization is interested in signing up for that. So if you do have questions that pop up in your head, I know sometimes when we get off, it's like, oh, I have a question. Feel free to shoot me an email and I'd be happy to forward that to Amanda for her to assist us with. But I don't think we have any questions that are coming through. So I'm going to let everyone off on time, keep to our hour, and I wish y'all a wonderful week. Thanks so much.
Elizabeth.
Bye.